In this lesson, you will learn how to climb and descend the aircraft at varying rates of climb and descent profiles. You will learn how to enter and maintain a climb, how to level off after a climb, how to initiate a descent, and how to level off after a descent. We'll also be looking at the effect of power, attitude, flap, undercarriage, and wind has on the aircraft during a climb or descent. We'll also have a look at the forces acting on the aircraft during a climb and descent. As visual pilots, the horizon is our primary reference. We need to have our eyes on the horizon for the majority of the time. The distance between the nose of the aircraft and the horizon we call the attitude. From the last lesson, we learned how to identify the attitude required for level flight. In this lesson, we will learn how to identify the attitude required for climbing and descending. As a general rule, when the aircraft enters a climb, the gap between the nose of the aircraft and the horizon gets smaller, and when the aircraft enters a descent, the gap between the nose of the aircraft and the horizon gets larger. During a climb, the four forces that act on the aircraft are thrust, drag, weight, and lift. For an aircraft to be able to climb, the thrust has to be able to exceed the drag. In a climb, a portion of the thrust is directed upward and acts in the same direction as lift. Also, during a climb, a portion of the weight is directed rearward. This is known as the rearward component of weight and acts in the same direction as drag. This is the reason the aircraft requires excess thrust to commence and maintain a climb. Once the climb is established, and if there is no acceleration or deceleration, the aircraft forces are in equilibrium. Power plus attitude plus aircraft configuration equals performance. The climb performance, therefore, is determined by the amount of power we have available, the aircraft's attitude, the aircraft's configuration such as flaps, undercarriage, and propeller pitch. Obviously, for a climb, other than takeoff, we want the aircraft to be configured to be as clean as possible. This would mean zero flaps. And if there was a retractable undercarriage, it would be retracted. And if we had a variable pitch propeller, it would be set for the optimal pitch setting for a climb. It is also important to note that the aircraft's climb performance varies depending on the power available, the attitude, the aircraft's configuration, the weight of the aircraft, the altitude, and the atmospheric conditions. The more power available, or excess thrust, the better the climb performance. Weight affects our climb performance, as more weight means we need more power available to maintain the same climb performance. An increase in weight for a given power setting and airspeed will reduce the aircraft's rate of climb. In a climb, there is a rear component of weight that acts rearward. Therefore, more weight will require more thrust to overcome this rearward component of the weight. We know that the aircraft performance is a factor of power plus attitude plus aircraft configuration. For the best climb performance, we should be using all the power we have available. The use of flap will increase the lift available, but also increase the induced and parasite drag, and this will reduce the aircraft's climb performance. The wind can also affect our climb. In particular, it will affect our best angle of climb. For instance, for the best angle climb in a headwind, the aircraft will achieve an increased angle of climb as the aircraft will be flying slower over the ground due to the headwind. If the aircraft encounters a tailwind, the best angle will be reduced as the aircraft will be travelling faster horizontally over the ground for the amount of height we gain. Wind speed and direction has no effect on the aircraft's rate of climb. It is important that during a climb and descent that we can accurately keep the aircraft straight. We do this by ensuring the aircraft is in balance and the wings are level with the horizon. We also make sure we maintain heading or track to a visual feature. We must also work hard to stay in balance, as this can cause a change in direction. We'll now look at three main types of descent. They are the cruise descent, the glide descent, and the approach descent. During a descent, we can control the glide angle, which is the angle the aircraft is descending relative to the ground. We can also control the aircraft's rate of descent, which is the rate measured in feet per minute the aircraft is descending. For a glide descent, no power is used. In a glide descent, the only control the pilot has over the descent rate and glide angle is with the attitude, airspeed, and perhaps the use of flaps. For a powered descent, some power is used. Normally, with a cruise descent, the pilot will elect to maintain the same cruise airspeed and descend at 500 feet per minute. In a glide descent, only 3 of the 4 forces are acting on the aircraft: lift, weight, and drag. In a glide descent, all the forces are in balance. In a powered descent, the thrust will overcome some of this drag, and therefore, for the same airspeed, there is more thrust produced and therefore a shallower descent profile. An approach descent in the descent configuration during an approach to land would normally involve flaps, and if the aircraft has retractable undercarriage, the undercarriage would be extended. For a glide descent, the Pilot Operating Handbook, also known as a POH, will advise what the best glide speed is for that aircraft type. The best glide speed is the airspeed for the best lift to drag ratio. Any faster than this speed and the total drag increases, and any slower than this speed, then the total drag also increases. This speed is important to know in the event of an engine failure, as it will result in obtaining the best gliding range for the aircraft. The maximum gliding range for the aircraft type will also be affected by wind, weight, and aircraft configuration. If you are flying into a strong headwind, your gliding range will be reduced. If you are flying with a tailwind, your gliding range will be extended. As for weight, the heavier the aircraft, the more lift is required to balance the force of weight. The extra force required means for the same airspeed, more angle of attack is required, which results in more drag and therefore diminishes the aircraft's glide range. Aircraft configuration also affects the aircraft glide range. If you have flaps selected, for instance, this will increase both induced drag and parasite drag. If the total drag increases, the aircraft's glide range will be reduced. The pilot can change the descent profile and range with the use of power or different airspeeds. When power is used in the descent, we effectively are balancing the drag force. Therefore, we do not require a steepened approach for the same airspeed in a glide. Power is normally used in a descent to maintain the cruise airspeed and to limit our rate of descent. For non-pressurized aircraft, a comfortable rate of descent on the ears for equalizing pressure is around 500 feet per minute. With the use of power, we can maintain this rate of descent with a cruise airspeed. If we were to reduce power and maintain the same cruise airspeed, our rate of descent would increase. The other advantage of using power in a descent is to protect the engine from overcooling. During a descent, the airflow through the engine is normally high and the power is low, and this can lead to excessive cooling of the engine. Having some power will help maintain the engine's temperature. We can also change the descent profile by changing the attitude and/or airspeed. We can also vary the descent range if we vary our attitude and airspeed. For instance, if the aircraft descends at 90 knots with a powered descent and the power is the same, but we increase the airspeed to 100 knots, this will effectively increase the rate of descent and reduce the descent range of the aircraft. If the airspeed is reduced from 90 knots to 80 knots for a powered descent, this will reduce our rate of descent and increase our range in nil wind. If the airspeed stays the same and the power decreases, the rate of descent will increase. And if the power is increased with the same airspeed is maintained, the rate of descent will decrease. In light training aircraft, as a general rule, we use power to control our rate of descent and rate of climb, and our attitude to control our airspeed. We'll now demonstrate how to commence and maintain a climb. Before commencing a climb, it is important to check the engine temperatures and pressures to ensure we can increase the engine power without harming the engine. The acronym for a climb is LPAT, or LPAT, which stands for L for lookout. Before commencing a climb, the pilot needs to have a very good lookout for other aircraft. The best way to scan and look out is to look left, center and above, and right. P is for power. Once we have confirmed the airspace is clear, we then increase our power. The aircraft's Pilot Operating Handbook, or POH, and the instructor will advise what the best power setting is for a standard climb although in many simple aircraft this may be full power for all climbs. A is for attitude. After increasing power, adjust the attitude for a climb attitude. T is for trim. Once the climb attitude is established and airspeed has stabilised, it is important to make sure the aircraft is trimmed correctly and the aircraft is in balance. In a climb, we have a power setting and less airflow going through the engine, so it is possible the engine may overheat. If the engine was overheating, the pilot would need to level off to increase airflow and then maybe reduce power until the temperature had decreased. When the aircraft is in a climb, due to the high nose attitude, it is difficult to spot any aircraft below the nose of the aircraft that may be on our level or climbing towards us. It is good practice and airmanship to lower the nose every 500 to 1,000 feet, depending on the aircraft performance, and to look out for other aircraft. This is also the best time to check the engine temperatures and pressures. When satisfied that there is no collision risk, continue the climb. In relation to the climb, two common terms used in aviation are the best rate of climb, known as Vy, and the best angle of climb, known as Vx. Best rate of climb allows the aircraft to fly to a nominated height in the least amount of time. The speed for best rate is located somewhere near the best lift-to-drag ratio for the aircraft type. Best angle of climb, known as Vx, allows the aircraft to climb the highest in the least amount of horizontal distance. If an aircraft was trying to take off and clear high trees at the end of the runway, it would use the best angle of climb. A normal cruise climb is normally 5 to 10 knots faster than the best rate of climb, or Vy. The POH, or your flight instructor, will let you know what the attitude and airspeed is for your particular aircraft for a normal cruise climb. The attitude will also look different between normal cruise, best rate, and best angle. Your flight instructor will advise what attitude and airspeed looks like for your aircraft type for that particular climb. We'll now demonstrate how to level off after a climb. Leveling off after a climb is the only climbing and descending sequence that is different from the others, and therefore the acronym is different. The acronym for leveling off is LAPT, or LAPT. L is for lookout for other aircraft. To look out, we check left, center above, forward, and right. A is for attitude. Adjust the attitude for level flight. P is for power. We reduce the power to the cruise power setting. T is for trim. Once the aircraft is level and the airspeed has stabilized, make sure the aircraft is trimmed correctly and in balance. The reason we do not reduce power first is because the airspeed will reduce before we level off. By adjusting our attitude first, then reducing the power, we are protecting our airspeed. We'll now demonstrate how to descend from level flight. The acronym for a descent is LPAT, or LPAT. L is for lookout. Before commencing the descent, it is important to look out for any aircraft. We'll do this by clearing our left, center, and below, and right. P is for power. Depending on aircraft type and what the pilot operating handbook stipulates, the pilot will reduce the power to a nominated power setting. A is for attitude. The pilot would then adjust the attitude for a descent attitude. Normally this would be the same as the cruise airspeed for a cruise descent. The pilot would monitor the temperature and pressures during the descent. Remember, during a descent we have a lower power setting and more airflow flowing through the engine, so overcooling is a possibility. T is for trim. Once the attitude, airspeed and rate of descent has stabilized, trim the aircraft and ensure the aircraft is in balance. We will now demonstrate how to level off after a descent. When it comes to leveling off after a descent, the acronym is LPAT, or LPAT. L is for lookout for other aircraft. We clear our left, center and forward and right. P is for power. Increase the power back to the cruise power setting. A is for attitude. Return to the level attitude. T is for trim. Once the airspeed has stabilized, we trim the aircraft and also make sure the aircraft is in balance. When climbing and descending, the pilot's eyes should be on the horizon for the majority of the time, the horizon being the primary reference. However, We also need to use the aircraft instruments for better accuracy and engine monitoring. Some of the instruments you may use are engine RPM, power and manifold pressure, engine oil temperature, engine oil pressure, airspeed indicator or the indicator of the airspeed, altimeter, VSI or the vertical speed indicator, slip or balance indicator, artificial horizon. Engine instruments are vital to determine the accurate power and RPM settings for our climb and descent. The engine oil pressure and temperature are important to determine if our engine is operating in the normal range. In a climb, we use the airspeed indicator to determine what type of climb that is, whether it will be a standard, normal, best angle, best rate, or other nominated climb. For the descent, the altimeter and vertical speed indicator can be used to determine when to level off and how much rate of descent we would like to select. A good scan is vital when climbing and descending. Not only do we need to scan the horizon for other aircraft, but also scan our instrument panel. A standard instrument scan is to conduct what is known as a radial scan that involves starting at the artificial horizon or attitude indicator and to another instrument such as the airspeed indicator, then always back to the artificial horizon or attitude indicator, then back to another instrument. However, we must remember as visual pilots, your eyes should still be on the horizon for the majority of the time. We scan the instruments quickly as a secondary check to make sure we are climbing and descending at the correct airspeed, we have not flown through our nominated attitude, and that our engine RPM, temperatures and pressures are all within safe tolerances. It is important before we take off to set the subscale on the altimeter correctly, as the altimeter reads the correct height above sea level. If you have access to a terminal area forecast or an ATIS, an AWIS, METAR, you could use the QNH provided and set the altimeter subscale to that QNH. However, if this is not available and you are flying locally, you could simply set the subscale to the airfield elevation. It is important to remember that the aircraft's climb performance is characterized by power plus attitude plus aircraft configuration and the atmospheric conditions. Let's look at a typical takeoff climb. For takeoff, we would normally use the full power setting. Depending on your aircraft type, you may have one stage of flap selected. Flaps are often used for takeoff to create more lift, so less runway is required for the takeoff roll. However, nothing comes for free, and the increase in lift also creates more drag. If some flap is recommended for takeoff, while the takeoff distance is reduced, the climb performance will be reduced due to the extra drag. On takeoff, we always try to take off where possible into the wind. Taking off into a headwind will decrease our takeoff distance and greatly assist our climb angle. Air density is mainly a factor of air pressure and air temperature. The higher the air density altitude, the lower the performance on a non-turbocharged aircraft. The decrease in air density has three main effects on the aircraft. Firstly, less dense air is going into the engine, meaning the engine will be performing at a reduced rate than if it had dense, cool air going into the engine. Temperature affects air density, so taking off on a very hot day will greatly reduce your engine's performance compared to taking off on a cold day. Secondly, less dense air will affect the propeller performance. A propeller thrust reduces as the density of the air decreases. Thirdly, the amount of lift an aerofoil produces reduces when the air becomes less dense. Adding these factors together, we can see that taking off with a high density altitude could be seriously detrimental to the aircraft's takeoff and climb performance. The worst scenario would be taking off from a high mountainous area on a hot day. The best scenario would be taking off from sea level on a cold day. Weight will also affect takeoff distance and climb performance for the aircraft. More weight will require more thrust to overcome inertia and more lift to overcome the weight. This will result in a longer takeoff run and reduced climb performance. Many aircraft cannot maintain full power for more than a nominated time. After takeoff power, the pilot may need to reduce the power to what is known as maximum continuous power. Maximum continuous power allows the aircraft to continue climbing with the maximum power available without damaging the aircraft. The climb and descent performance can also be affected if we decide to turn during a climb and descent. We'll cover this in more detail in turning. However, as a general rule, turning will decrease the climb or descent performance. The pilot must remember to monitor the engine instruments during a climb to ensure the engine does not overheat, and monitor the engine instruments during a descent to ensure the engine does not become too cold. During a climb, we have less airflow flowing through the engine and a high power setting, therefore it can be prone to overheating. During a descent, we have more airflow flowing through the engine and often a low power setting, so overcooling is a possibility. During a climb, if the engine starts to get close to overheating, the pilot may need to level off and reduce power to reduce the temperature of the engine. In a descent, if the engine is cooling too quickly or becoming too cold, you may need to add more power to ensure the engine remains warm enough. Another issue, particularly in a descent with carburetted engines, is carbi-ice. During a descent, there is often a low power setting selected and high airspeed, and this can cool the engine. A carburettor mixes a fuel and air mixture before being directed into the aircraft cylinder. The fuel-air mixture is mixed in the venturi. The venturi is an area that causes a drop in static pressure due to the increased velocity of the airflow. This drop in static pressure also causes a drop in temperature, and under certain conditions can cause ice to form and stop the flow of fuel and air to the engines. Usually descending through moist, cool air at low RPM is when carbi-ice can form. However, carbi-ice can form in many varying conditions even without visible moisture. Most aircraft have a carbi heat lever or button. When this is selected, it induces hot air into the carburetor to either melt ice or avoid ice from forming. The carbi heat should be selected if carbi ice is a possibility or the engine starts running rough in carbi ice atmospheric conditions. For a glide descent with no power, the best glide speed will give the best range in near wind. If there is more weight, the range will be reduced, and if there is a higher density altitude, the range will also be reduced. Flying into a headwind will reduce the range, while flying with a tailwind will increase the range. Before a pilot or student pilot conducts a flight, they should conduct a personal, mental and physical checklist. To help maintain this checklist, an acronym has been developed known as I'm Safe. I stands for illness. Have you had any illness over the last few days that may affect your ability to fly? M stands for medication. Have you been on any medication that may affect your ability to fly? S stands for stress. Have you been experiencing any stress lately that may affect your ability to fly? A is for alcohol or drugs. Have you been taking any alcohol or drugs in the last 24 hours that may impact your ability to fly safely? F is for fatigue. Have you had adequate rest and sleep over the last week, and are you hydrated? Have you eaten? E is for emotion. How are your emotions? Do you have any negative emotions that could impact the safety of the flight? During your flight training, you'll be introduced to the use of checklists. Aircraft checklists are important as due to the complexity of the many items we need to check on an aircraft, both before and during flight, it is not reliable to rely on human memory alone. Most aircraft have standard checklists supplied with the pilot operating handbook. It is vital we use these checklists every flight so the pilot does not forget to check a critical item, for instance, forgetting to select flaps on takeoff. It is important that all pilots take a good look out for other aircraft during their flight. The human eye has its limitations. We do not tend to see objects very well if they are not moving. Also, there is a phenomenon known as empty field myopia. This is a condition when there is nothing for the eyes to focus on. They automatically focus a few meters ahead of the aircraft. The pilot, being unaware of this, may miss distant objects such as aircraft on the horizon. A good scan technique is left to right, above and below the horizon, then right to left, then repeat. Also, during the scan, it is good practice to stop intermittently and try and focus on an object on the ground in the distance to avoid empty field myopia. If you see an aircraft, use a clock code reference to inform the other pilot of the aircraft positions. If an aircraft is stationary and level in your windscreen, it is either flying directly towards you or away from you. Some of the potential threats during a climbing and descending lessons are aircraft in our close proximity or above or below us. This is why a good lookout is essential before initiating a climb or descent. Also, ensuring that the engine temperatures and pressures for the climb and descent stay within acceptable engine tolerances. Another possible threat is to ensure a safe airspeed is maintained during the climb. We do not want to get the aircraft too slow and close to the stall speed. Also, during a descent, we want to make sure the airspeed does not get too fast, and in particular in rough air, the airspeed stays within the normal operating speeds. We hope you enjoyed the climbing and descending pre-flight briefing. We suggest you complete the quiz to test your knowledge at the end of this video. Happy and safe flying, and see you next time on Go Fly Online.